it's all very well having nice, happy love affairs, and pretty people, and everyone being happy and joyful. But that makes for a really boring crime book. So I like mystery novels set in horrible times.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Manuscript. As always, I am your host, Cooper Anderson, coming to you from my very own library pocket dimension. Before we get into it today, Beyond the Manuscript is currently available everywhere you find podcasts, and so if you like what I do here, hit that like, subscribe, follow, all of the buttons. It absolutely helps out the channel and lets me keep doing what I love, which is talk to you lovely folks about books. My guest today is a writer of over 50 novels. He is currently the honorary secretary of the Detection Club, the founder of the Medieval Murderers. He has helped set up and served on the committee of the Historical Writers Association and has been on the committee and chair of the Crime Writers Association. And most importantly, he was the Grand Marshal of the first parade of the 2014 New Orleans Mardi Gras. Here today to talk about his latest book, One Last Dance Before I Die, please help me in welcoming my guest this week, Mr. Michael Jecks. How are we doing today, Michael?
Very well indeed, thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for agreeing to do this. I'm so excited to pick your brain about writing and crime writing and all of that cool stuff here. So, thank you so much for being a guest.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's an absolute delight today, especially because it's filthy weather out there.
It absolutely is. You know, it's the UK weather is infamous for a reason. But yeah, absolutely. It is definitely cozy book weather for sure. So to kind of get things started, could you tell us a little bit about your latest book, One Last Dance Before I Die?
Yes, I can only show a proof copy, sadly, but it's got a lovely cover. Basically, I got intrigued with the Shanghai police many years ago because I didn't tell you this before, actually, Cooper, but I was actually born on November the 11th. So I was born on Armistice Day, and I've always had an interest in history generally, but especially history of the First and Second World Wars. And one of the things I discovered not that long ago was that the two guys, well, just step it back a little way. At the beginning of the Second World War, Winston Churchill wanted to have some new raiders, some new special operators that he could send into Europe and cause mayhem. So he created the commandos. And the commandos needed to be really highly trained for fighting, hand-to-hand combat, all sorts of nasty stuff. And so where did he go to find people to train the commandos? He went to Shanghai, to the Shanghai police force, because Shanghai was about the most dangerous place in the world in the 20s and 30s. Even the Chicago police, who were not noted for being shrinking violets, they arranged an exchange trip for some of their officers to go to Shanghai. So Shanghai officers went to Chicago, Chicago police went to Shanghai. The Chicago police, after less than 2 weeks, said, no, it's too dangerous, and wanted to go back home, because Shanghai was uniquely dangerous. And so there were some police there who started getting very inventive, and they invented, for your American viewers, you'll probably know of practical pistol shooting, drawing fast and firing without aiming at the target. They invented body armor for police. They invented CS gas. They invented the SWAT teams. They were originally designed in Shanghai. And these two guys who are responsible for training the police and all these things were called Fairbairn and Sykes. And so the commando dagger was actually designed for street fighting by the Shanghai police. And the two inventors, Fairbairn and Sykes, were the two that Churchill brought over to train the commandos. And oddly enough, as he went through the war, the Special Operations Executive, the very devious, behind-the-lines chaps, were also trained by Fairbairn and Sykes. And after the war, all of the CIA's agents across the world were being taught by Fairbairn. So they had a fascinating history. And I always thought, what was it that made Shanghai so interesting? And then you sort of go through life and you see films like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and you've got this glitzy vision of what Shanghai was like, sort of meeting of the East and the West, and huge amounts of money, and all the same problems that were predominant in Chicago, because you had prostitution, drugs, vast proliferation of guns with no controls. And all of it set in the middle of China, which was going through a series of civil wars. It's fantastic. I mean, the nasty thing is that I'm a crime writer, so I like writing about the worst times in the world. It's all very well having nice, happy love affairs, and pretty people, and everyone being happy and joyful. That makes for a really boring crime book. So I like mystery novels set in horrible times.
So I did have a question. Is that where we get the phrase, like, he or she got shanghaied? Is that where we get it from?
Yes, because it was, I think it meant different things at different times. It could mean being kidnapped. It could mean being knocked on the head and killed. But Shanghai was really notable for the excesses of poverty, the excesses of enormous wealth. And you got people like, I still think it's rather lovely that William Fairbairn wrote quite a few books on self-defense and shooting and various other things. And one of the prefaces to one of his books was written by Douglas Fairbanks, who made a friend of his when Fairbanks went out to Shanghai, because all the rich and famous went there. It was a fabulous free port. It was never part of the British Empire. It was always a separate municipality, a free port in the middle of China, mainly due to the Opium Wars and everything. It's not particularly nice as a history, but it is just fascinating, especially since you had the International Territory, which was run by a council of the British, Americans, originally the Germans, but after the First World War, the German representative disappeared and they had the Japanese instead, which didn't end up well with the Second World War. But right next door to it was the French territory, which did become part of the French Empire. And so you had this little boundary between the international and the French, and it made for some interesting difficulties. You also had, all the way around the whole of these two territories, were the Chinese city of Shanghai. It was still Chinese. So you had these little difficulties, such as, for example, if you were in the middle of the municipal territory, the international territory, and you committed a crime, you could pick and choose which nationality you had. If you were Mexican, you were fully entitled to run a casino, for example. If you were British, you weren't. If you and every different nation that you had, they had different rules for you. That's really what got me so enthusiastic about it. It's just a fantastic period and a fantastic series of stories. There's a great book, which is here somewhere, because I was looking at it only the other day. I've lost it. But I'll have to dig that one out later. It's all about the history of Shanghai and absolutely fascinating. That's enough about me whittering on about this now. But I will say that this book is all about it. It is a fairly noirish style of book, rather like a Raymond Chandler, with a certain amount of humour in it as well, because as you know, I do like my humour. But it starts out with the idea of a very wealthy banker's car is shot to pieces by some unpleasant gangsters, and you're never sure why. Who was the intended target? Was it the banker himself? Was it his family? Each of the different members of the family had particular reasons for other people wanting to dispose of them. And so it is very much a Raymond Chandler type of story, I guess, because he's going through the wealthy, the aristocracy of the area, quite a lot of the poor people, but also looking at life through the eyes of the very rich and famous.
Yeah, so like you mentioned before, in this particular time, Shanghai is getting kind of carved up by different nationalities and, of course, having its own identity. Do you find playing with those kinds of borders or limitations helpful, or does it just make it more complicated when you're actually writing it?
Generally, I find it's really useful looking at the actual history, the legal systems, and I've got books up here on coroner's rules. I've got books on the law. I've got books on how to conduct post-mortems. I've got books on every aspect of research you can imagine. But I must admit, the fact that you had interterritoriality, I think it was called, so if you were German, you lived by the German laws. If you were English, you had to live by English laws. Mexican, you had Mexican laws. If you were Chinese, well, tough, you had Chinese laws, and that wasn't so much fun. Um, but trying to get your brain around, you invent a story, you put people into these positions, then you think, oh, hold on, no, he's not English. He wouldn't have that rule. Uh, it really did not add to the simplicity of writing this book. But usually, I tend to find that most of my books, I mean, all of my historical books, the one that we were talking about just now, Rebellion's Message, for example, um, that's based on a large number of coroner's rolls. So I actually try to take genuine events that did happen and then just elaborate on those events. So often you'll find a coroner's roll said, well, Eric was killed. Not too sure why, but the value of the dagger used was 1 and 6, and so therefore that's the fine for the death. And murder was committed because he didn't have English represented. And you can go through and find all these different terms. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, I've got to put that into a book. But certainly with Shanghai, it was a little bit more problematic.
Gotcha. So we all know that you are a historical writer and that also, you have mysteries in your novels as well. So
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how much research you do before starting a book, or are you just constantly consuming history books and then think, oh, I'm going to file that away for another book somewhere down the future?
Again, if you look behind me, this is mostly my research shelves. So I've got the whole of this wall going down there, and that wall, and bookshelves there, and double bookshelves there. All of these are just research. My fiction reading is all in the sitting room. So, yes, I am constantly getting hold of new books so I can verify or add to the information I've got. So, one I've got only very recently is this, which is Jacks, Knaves and Vagabonds, which is a fantastic and fairly weighty tome, but it's all about the Tudor period and the types of crime committed, the way the courts were organised, the officials, what sort of law breakers and lawmakers there were. And then again, I've got another book here, which is the handbook that every historical writer should have, because it makes sure that I get the days right. I know which day of the week each date fell on. Yes, I spend the whole of my time really researching, and it's not such a hardship because mainly what I write about things that interest me. And I was once advised by a good buddy of mine, a Canadian, who said that if I wanted to make money as a writer, I ought to write about baseball or Formula One racing. I said, I've got no interest in either of them. He said, no, don't worry about that. Just write about those things because you'll make money. I firmly believe you can only entertain and enthuse people in your subject if you are entertained and enthused by it yourself. So I write books which I find entertaining, all about different aspects of history. And I'm quite sure my Canadian friend hasn't read any of them. But you can't ever finish learning. It's even when there's stupid things. I did one book that was all about witchcraft, so I've got 3 or 4 books on witchcraft and how it was conducted. Because not a lot of people know this. You know that thing about voodoo, and you have to have a wax doll and stab it with pins to kill people. That was all because of, as they say, the slaves that were brought over to the Indies and so on. Wasn't. That was British and European medieval magic. Um, and the reason why it became associated with voodoo was there were preachers from the UK who went out there, and to raise money, they wanted to explain how uniquely dangerous these people were. And so they brought back this story of, oh, they're all making little wax figurines and stabbing them to kill people, because they knew damn well that was something that peasants in the UK and Europe would understand, because it's what they did. Really fascinating when you look at how propaganda is spread.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question I had was, in your opinion, what are some like mandatory elements that you think needs to go into a story in order to make it a good mystery?
It's one of those interesting questions. For me, it's always the characters. Always the characters, because the plot will come out of the characters. So I think that the most important thing is having strong characters, believable characters, characters who all have their own idiosyncrasies, ideally, and very strong motivations. They're key. Then I would also have the landscape as a strong character for most of my books. An awful lot of my books are set on Dartmoor, where I live. And that has got its own atmosphere, a very distinct atmosphere. In a similar way, when I wrote Act of Vengeance, which is a modern day book, that was based very much on my trips to the States. So it incorporated parts of Canada, Anchorage and Alaska, various places out in Prince William Sound, all the way down to New Orleans, Houston, Austin. It was everywhere I'd been to in America that I really enjoyed going to. And just going to a place, you get such a good feel for how it looks. I mean, one thing that really stupid, I know, but one thing I always carry with me is a sketchbook, because I firmly believe that you can walk around a landscape, you can take photos with your phone or a camera if you're really old-fashioned like me, and that's all very well, but actually it's nothing like as effective at fixing a place in your mind as taking a sketchbook and doing a quick watercolor or just even a pencil sketch, doesn't matter what. But that fixes it there in your head. It's much easier then when you're back in your office here to go back and think, oh yeah, there's my sketchbook. But if I try to open it and show you things, that whole pile of books is going to topple over, so I won't do that. But it's just a case of, when you're out and about, make a sketch of a place and that'll fix it in your head. That I think gives the location almost a character of its own. But then, of course, you've got to have a strong plot. Well, yeah, but strong plots come out of the strong motivations of the different characters. I'm one of those who very, very rarely has a full synopsis. I've often had working synopses, because when you go to a publisher, you've got to demonstrate that you've got an idea for a book. I once had, when I was working with Headline a few years ago, they had this great thing. They'd taken on a couple of new graphic designers, and they said, Mike, can you give us an outline and jacket outline for the next book? I said, well, hang about, I'm in the middle of writing this book currently. I don't have the faintest idea what the next one's going to be about. I said, well, just give us a quick synopsis. So I thought, oh, all right. So I gave him a quick synopsis, and I had this brilliant idea that involved a cross, across Dartmoor. All of the gravestones tended to be old-fashioned, simple crosses. So a cross with a skull on one of the arms and another skull at the foot and ivy creeping up it. I thought, that's fantastic. I had this brilliant idea, sent it off to them. That was great. A year later, I got this jacket copy for what the cover was going to look like. I hadn't written the book. I hadn't even looked at the synopsis. In fact, I'd lost the synopsis because my computer had died. And so all of a sudden I was presented with this really rather good picture. And I thought, what the hell was I thinking of? You do get these sort of problems, but I do think that the characters will force the plot. The landscape also can force the plot, and the plot is something that hopefully will erupt from all of the different motivations and antagonisms that you've got within them. But you also need humour. You also need to have humour. I mean, some of my books are intentionally very humorous. Others are a lot bleaker, but I think humour is just the way of calming people down after a bit of an exciting glitch.
I think so too. I think for me, and again, this is just because I'm a big Terry Pratchett fan, it was like humor always acted like those armor piercing bullets.
Okay.
For me, humor acted like okay, we're going to get through these, like, natural defenses of readers, where a reader might be a little more cautious about a book. And if you can get through to a person with humor, it means the emotional or serious stuff that is going to land a lot harder.
Oh, absolutely. And he was a brilliant writer. Such a loss when he died.
I know, I know. It's really crazy because I was a big Neil Gaiman fan, and like for a couple of years, and I didn't know about Good Omens. I didn't know about all of the other collaborations they had done together at the time, and then because I was following him on Instagram, and I think he made a post about when Sir Terry died.
Yeah.
I then immediately read like 13 Discworld novels in a row. It was like, these were amazing. How am I just discovering these things when the poor guy has already passed on? And so I like to think he's one of those lost geniuses to time, I think, for sure.
It was very sad. He was also a thoroughly lovely bloke. I met him a couple of times. I got him to come and give a talk to the Crime Writers Association. And he was such a delightfully humble guy. You'd never guessed how successful he was. He was just wonderful.
And I like to think, when people name the top fictional detectives, you have your Sherlock Holmeses, you have your Poirots. I like to think Sam Vimes really needs to go up on that wall of fame for sure.
Absolutely right.
So you were an organizer for the Crime Writers Association debut dagger for a number of years. In your opinion, what are some pitfalls that an early crime writer might accidentally fall into if they're not careful?
Oh, well, the very first thing is if you're actually, this is a 2 point thing. The first part is if you're writing for a competition or writing for a publisher or an agent, read any listings they've got about how they want things presented, because if you ignore them, you'll have your manuscript go straight in the bin. And I can vouch for this because it happened to me a number of times. When I was running the debut dagger, I put up a limited number of instructions. One was I really wanted everything to be typed, not handwritten, because I can't read everyone's handwriting. It had to be double line spaced on one side of paper only. A lot of people sent in single line spaced on two sides. Pointless. Another simple rule was not one that I set out, but it's one that editors told me about because the debut dagger was unique. What would happen was that we'd put out an advert for people to write in with the debut dagger, and they had to send in 300 words of a synopsis of their complete novel with the first 3,000 words of that novel. So that then was whittled down by me as the organizer, and I would take a long list to a group of editors and agents, and they would select the actual winners, which was nice because every year I got 4 or 5 new authors published because the editors would have a fight over the lunch table about who was going to get which of these authors. So that was good. But sometimes you get really silly responses. I did get some handwritten ones, but there was a little note at the bottom pointing out this was a prisoner at Her Majesty's prison and he didn't have access to a computer or a typewriter. And I thought, actually, that's fair enough. So I let it go through. But sometimes you'd find things, and this, as I say, is what the editors told me, was there's an inverse relationship to the quality of the presentation of a manuscript to the content of the manuscript. So there were times when you'd get neatly bound manuscripts with fully printed covers, and they looked very nice. It was very good. But generally, the editor's immediate reaction was, well, probably what's inside is going to be rubbish then. There's no point in tarting things up. Another thing that was a basic rule was that all manuscripts should be unbound. They should ideally not even have a staple, just be held together with an elastic band, or if you must do it, a treasury tag going through a single hole at the top. Because editors tend, and me too, we all tend to work with loose leaf. We just don't have bound things. And it gets in the way on your desk if you've got a damn great manuscript that's been stuck together. So again, a simple thing, but read the rules. I did also find that it's difficult when you've got somewhere in the region of 2,000 manuscripts coming in to look through them all. And this is something a lot of aspiring writers miss out on. But if you send off your manuscript to an editor or an agent, the very first thing they're going to do is try to figure out a reason to reject you. Sounds very nasty, but it's a fact. Because, going back to 2002, I think it was, I had a long chat with the head of the HarperCollins crime list, Julia Wisdom, lovely lady. And then she was getting 11 unsolicited manuscripts a day. No one can read through 11 manuscripts a day. And at the same time, I spoke to my agent, Jane Conway Gordon, and she was getting about the same. So every one of them is receiving far too many things to read. What they're looking for is a reason to say, oh, well, there's no point with that. The easiest way to reject something is it comes through and you find a typo, a grammatical mistake, anything, whatever it can be on the first page. You really are restricting your chances. So what I always say when I'm teaching writing is, if you don't respect and demonstrate your respect for your own work, don't expect anybody else to, because no editor's going to. If you can't go through it and make sure, at the very least, that the first page is absolutely perfect and the second page as perfect as you can make it, and so on, no editor's going to say, well, obviously it is my life's duty and work to take on this author so I can teach them how to write. They don't do that. So that's the biggest takeaway I think I got from it. I mean, there's loads of things, but there was one where, as an American, you know that the boot of a car is commonly known as a trunk in your country. I did get one manuscript which said that the body was hidden in the trunk of a black Sudan, not a sedan, a Sudan. And I think that poor devil must have been jolly uncomfortable. It also had a grisly secret on the next page, which was GRIZZ. You think, oh, dear. It was one of those where I wanted to carry on reading, but I really didn't have time. But it is difficult. I mean, I spend a lot of time now trying to help aspiring writers, and so those are the sorts of things that I do try to bring up.
It's so funny that you mentioned reasons to reject people, because before I started working here at Manuscript, when I was getting my master's, I was an intern at a small publisher.
Oh, really?
And on top of my regular duties, like getting coffee, making tea, a part of my job there was I was supposed to take the daily stack of rejected manuscripts, shred them, and then throw them away, because there was, they wanted to make sure there was no liability or for holding on to stuff, and then also to send out rejection letters. So I was facing this kind of pile on a near daily basis, and eventually I started asking the editors, like, why was this one gone? Why wasn't this one accepted? And they were mentioning a lot of things you just mentioned there, like, yeah, this one's typed weird. There was one we had that came in on blue paper. Like, it was just on blue paper, and they were like, yeah, that'll do it. I think they were going for, if you know the movie Legally Blonde, where she sends in a CV with pink paper, they were like, oh, yeah, this one's going to stand out. And no, we didn't want that kind of thing at all. So, yeah, it was rejected immediately.
Because people do put a lot of effort into thinking about that sort of thing. And, it's... every time when I was going through things, I did get one where someone insisted that I had to write to him with signing a full non-disclosure agreement before he'd send me his manuscript. No, it's very straightforward.
Yeah, I'm not going to do an NDA with this.
I mean, if you're not going to trust an editor or another professional writer, then I'm afraid, fine, go away.
Like, the thing is, the way around that is even easier, because if, say, someone nefarious wants to steal someone's manuscript, what you do before you even send it out to anybody is you mail a copy to yourself so that the post office dates and stamps that envelope, and then you keep it sealed. And so there'll be like proof, that this existed at this time and this date according to the Royal Mail or U.S. Post Office or whatever. So, yeah.
Even easier than that. I mean, you type it up on your computer and that is date stamped. So people do get a bit over precious about such things. It's like that I've got this wonderful device. It's a free write. Whoops, there's the camera, which I bought. It's stupid. I was sent a free write some years ago. This thing to review, and I had to send it back in a couple of weeks. And I contacted the firm Astra House and said, I can't do it in a couple of weeks because I'm in the middle of a book and I'm not going to stop writing just so I can test your machine. So I said, that's all right, keep it for a month. And I said, all right. And 2 weeks later, because I got it out and just had a play with it, I had to contact them and say, how much do I have to pay to keep it? Because it's brilliant. And I've now got this one, which is a smaller, slightly more portable version. But the main thing is brilliant keyboard, and it syncs over Wi-Fi to the cloud, and then you can call it back to your computer. The number of people who said, I wouldn't touch something like that. Oh, phew. In the cloud, anyone could steal it. So who's going to bother? The name is John Grisham or Jeff Dealer. They're not going to bother for a very small return. I mean, I suppose if you're, you may not realise how little authors earn, in which case you might think it's worth stealing. But
so this is actually something I want to talk about. I think authors specifically, tend to be over-romanticized either in media or just in people's minds. Like, I was watching, there's an American sitcom called Modern Family, and they're on a train in California, and two of the characters run into a murder mystery writer on the train, and he's donning a tweed coat with a tweed hat in the middle of summer in California on a typewriter on a train. And it's like and he's like the most annoying person I think I've ever seen in my life.
And he's unbelievable anyway. He would have had a quill, obviously, and an ink.
Yeah, if you're going to commit to being that guy, go all the way. Like, you'll go get parchment, you'll need to have an inkwell.
Well, I always use fountain pens when I have to write anything.
Hey, we're fountain pen buddies. Yeah, I got one myself right here.
Well, it's I just cannot use biros. It makes my writing completely illegible even to me. And fountain pens for me are one of the few joys of life. But there is this attitude that writers, the average writer wakes up at about 10 or 11 in the morning with a mild hangover and shuffles downstairs in his slippers to sit in his dressing gown at the kitchen table, type up a page or two, and then he has to go out because he has to have lunch with his agent or his editor. It doesn't happen.
And he's so annoyed that he's so popular and everyone wants a piece of him, but he just wants to write without ripping his hair out. And it's...
Oh, you all have that. But the trouble is, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the money nowadays, but it used to be when I started back in 94, books were then £5.99 for a paperback, I'd get 7.5% as a royalty. So every time a book got sold, I earned about 42 pennies, which was nice. Now, books have gone up 50%. They're now £8.99, nearly £9. And because of the impact of a certain large retailer, instead of getting 7.5% of the cover price, authors get 7.5% of net receipts. Amazon demands, for example, 80% discount. So the author now gets, with a 50% increase in the book price, the author now gets 75 to 80% reduction. It's now about 11 to 12p, which is a big drop from 42.
Yeah, the idea behind it, they're creating a bigger pie. And while you're getting a small sliver out of that bigger pie, you're supposed to get higher returns. The thing is, that doesn't work unless you're massive, unless you have like a huge following, and people unless your last name is like Sanderson or something like that.
Or I forget where the report is now, but I think it was produced by the Society of Authors and the Authors Licensing and Collection Service, and they discovered that the average income for an author, I think it was in 2014, was £17,000, and it's now dropped to 11,000, which is just about half the national minimum wage.
Oh, yeah, it's rough out there.
So it's not a bigger pot. What's happened is that there's a lot of publishers and retailers who are making very good money, and the authors have lost a lot.
Right, and I think one warning sign or a cautionary tale I think I've seen floated around is that pretty soon people are, organizations like Amazon, they're not just going to be buying a particular book or book series, they're going to buy like an IP for everything in there. So you're not only going to buy your book, but they're also going to buy movie rights, merch rights, and all the other kind of stuff until where they own this created universe where, that was created pretty much by one person, and then they get to do what they want with it while cutting out the person who actually created it.
Which is a terrifying concept, because the only real reason for writing is maintaining your own control of the whole project, but also there is that chance that every writer has to be a gambler because you're hoping that you will hit the jackpot one day. But if they're taking away the jackpot, well, writing is a fairly intensive job, and it's not very good for most people. And if you lose that chance of a jackpot, then really is it worth it? Probably not.
Yeah, that's really true. Like you said, it's a gamble on yourself. It's also really tough on a person because it's solitary. You are by yourself at your desk or in a chair or whatever, and you're typing away. You don't really have other people to work or bounce off of your ideas on. You have to make it all up by yourself and then try to navigate the world all on your own.
Yeah, it's trying to do the marketing and so on as well, which is really difficult.
So you've written over 50 novels in your career. Is there any one or like a series that stands out to you as being particularly difficult to write, when like this one where this one just doesn't want to come into the world, something like that?
Well, it's not that so much, but I don't know if you can see there. There's no, you can't see there, but just offside. But my Vintner trilogy. I'll just lift this up.
It just never ends. The entire books just keep going on for infinity.
Those are all my books. These ones here, Fields of Glory, Blood on the Sand, Blood of the Innocents. And they're all a trilogy set around a band of archers in the 100 Years' War. And the thing was, the first book, Fields of Glory, was really good as a concept when I presented it to my editor, and she was very keen on it, Claire. And it's one of those things where I didn't really think about it too much. I thought, oh yeah, bit of war, that'd be fun. Band of Brothers was on TV. I thought, yeah, I could do Band of Brothers based around a group of archers, a vingtaine of archers in 100 Years' War on the march to Crécy, and then end it with the Battle of Crécy. I thought, easy. And then I started doing the research, and I discovered just what a violent, vicious, brutal bunch of murderous devils the British soldiers were, and it was horrible. Oh no, what have I done? So I started writing this book, and I took it as in the same way as I write my crime books. I looked at it from the point of view of both sides. So I had the idea of the French refugees running from the British as well as the British soldiers. And then I got into the character of the British archers as well and tried to explain what was motivating them then. And it was an interesting project because I had the idea of a trilogy from the outset. The idea was the first book was going to be the Long March to Crécy and the battle. The second was the year after with the Siege of Calais, where the British won it. And then the third book was 10 years later, which was the Battle of Poitiers. And the reason for the gap was that in the middle of those 10 years, they had the Black Death and all sorts of other problems. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to look at the same band of archers, but 10 years later, when they've gone through that, when they've seen their families die of the plague and all of the other aspects. And it was really good as a trilogy, but it was not soul destroying, but it was just bloody hard work, put it like that. And I really needed to come out of that series with a slightly more cheerful thing. And that's why I wrote the Blackjack series. I went to meet lovely woman who was the editor, Kate Lyle Grant, editor at Seven House, and I allowed her to buy me lunch. Not often editors do this, but I allowed her to buy me lunch. And I pitched this idea of an assassin who doesn't want to be an assassin, who's basically got lumbered with the job, and he doesn't want to give the job up because he's got money, he's got a new suit every year, he's now popular with the women, which he never has been before, and all he has to do is occasionally kill someone, which he can't do, but he knows people who possibly could. And so you've got this incompetent bloke who thinks he's the world's gift to women, and it's all told through his perspective, and the reader hopefully can pick up on the vibes by the way other people always react to him, that they think he's a complete plonker and a waste of space. And he just makes me laugh whenever I write his books. I'm actually finishing up book 9 in that series now. And he's still making me chuckle as I write them. But that was very much a reaction. I mean, I do, as I said earlier, I do believe that all books should have a certain amount of humour in them, especially if you're writing about death and murder and crime. But it's difficult sometimes to find the humour when you're dealing with a bunch of murderous mercenary thugs who are running across the country, killing everybody in their path. doesn't strike me as very funny.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we are running a little bit over time here. So, Michael, what are you working on right now?
Well, book 9 in the Blackjack series. So he's currently in the slightly difficult position because it's getting close to the end of Queen Mary Tudor's reign, Bloody Mary's reign. And so Jack, who is an assassin for one political group, is now in the middle of being told he's got to kill for 2 political groups, and they're different people that have to die. That makes it rather problematic for him. It also involves him being accused of murdering someone else, which he has nothing to do with. So he's spending his time confused at the same time as trying to escape various different difficulties that are approaching him at a rate of knots.
Well, Mike, before we wrap up here, where can people find your stuff?
Anywhere you can buy a book.
Anywhere you can buy a book. I like that. That's a pretty good brag, I think. You know, like where you get books, you find Michael Jecks, right?
You will. You will. They're all at Amazon and all of the other retailers. So, yep. If you like Kindle, they're there. If you like paperbacks, they're there. Go and make your pick.
I want to thank my guest today, Michael Jecks, for coming on the show. Beyond the Manuscripts, of course, is powered by Manuscripts, where you never write alone. Please go buy his upcoming book, One Last Dance Before I Die. And yeah, thanks again, Michael, for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thanks a lot.